I'm Keith McCullough, and welcome to day 3 of the Investing Summit. I'm sitting down now, which is probably good for me. I've been a little stressed out, I guess, the last couple of days. So I found somebody to help me with that. Dr. Gio, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Keith.
So Dr. Gio's helped a lot of people that play. Like I always say, if you want to play this game at the highest level, start to think through how people do other things at the highest level.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, people have a lot of baggage in this game. A lot of people don't play it, right? A lot of people joined, I call it the game, but they've joined the game post-pandemic.
Yeah.
They got a commission-free trading account. They're trying to figure it out. Or you have actually a lot of people who've played the game realize that the way that you used to play the game doesn't work, and they're trying to figure out what the highest level is. So there's constant coaching from my perspective and leveling up. And the hardest thing for me is, one to many, because everybody's at a different level.
Yeah.
Maybe let's just start with that, because everything from pro football to Point72, one of the best hedge funds in the world. You've coached a lot of different kinds of players in a lot of different kinds of games. Like how would you start with just that general problem that I have trying to coach one to many?
Yeah, no. So you hit on something that's really interesting, and it's really become sort of the second iteration of my career and my life, is trying to understand what life is like at the very tail end of the curve. So if I sort of play the tape back, I've worked with not the top 1%, probably like the top 1,000th%,
yeah,
right, of the best, like BOTB, right? And it really hit me one day. So I was out in Dallas with a golfer named Jordan Spieth, and Jordan Spieth is sort of a young phenom. His golf game has been up and to the right, since he was 10 years old, and he had his first slump a couple of years ago. But I remember I flew from Dallas to Buffalo because I was working with the Buffalo Bills. And Sean McDermott, people don't know this about Sean McDermott, who's the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. Sean McDermott was 70-0 as a high school wrestler. Like, it's insanely hard to be 70-0 at anything. So Sean McDermott is a tail end of the curve kind of guy. Obviously, Jordan Spieth. And then I flew from Buffalo to Westchester Airport and to Point72, and I was on a walk with Steve. Steve and I would go for walks around the building. And on one of the laps, it hit me. I said, I'm having the same conversation. When you talk about one of the sort of all-time greatest golfers, generational golfer, Jordan Spieth, and soon-to-be Hall of Fame coach Sean McDermott, and obviously Steve Cohen, you realize at the tail end of the curve, it looks pretty similar. There's this wonderful article that I recommend to everybody. It's called The Mundanity of Excellence, and you can find it online anywhere. And in this article, The Mundanity of Excellence, the author talks about an inversion that happens. And so what happens is when people are trying to become good at something, like golfers, they like to drivers. You go to any driving range, people are hitting the driver. But when you watch the best of the best golfers, they're always working on 3-foot putts. They're always working on their short game. For example, Tiger Woods, the most remarkable statistic in all of sports, in any statistic I've ever heard, Tiger Woods went almost 3 years, and he missed 4 putts inside of 3 feet.
Really?
So yeah, so you're talking about, and I forget the exact numbers. Let's call it 2,000 putts, and you're talking about in wind and rain and imperfect greens and pressure and noise and this and that. Such is the level of attention to detail on a 3-foot putt, right? And so at the very tail end, I remember when I first showed up at the Buffalo Bills training, I'll never forget this moment. I show up at the Buffalo Bills. Sean McDermott had reached out to me. He had heard about my reputation. He invited me in to evaluate what he was doing. And from about 100 yards away, I see a defensive back everyone was practicing doing their own thing, and it caught my eye, and I said, I don't know who that is, but that guy's special. Turns out it was a guy named Jordan Poyer. And Jordan Poyer, over the last 5 years, has established himself as one of the best defensive backs in the NFL. But you can tell the way he was practicing. Mm-hmm. It was the level of detail, how much attention he was paying to the little things, just in a drill in preseason training camp. And so when you know what to look for, you realize at the tail end of the curve, I see a lot of it here, by the way, at Hedgeye. I walk in, and when you know what to look for, I'm like, oh, I've seen this before. And this is not, I'm not being disingenuous. Like, I can tell that people here, they're engaged. They're trying to solve hard problems. People are working head down. It's a culture thing. Mm-hmm. But when you know what to look for, the tail end of the curve looks very similar across domains.
That's amazing. That's Hey there, Hedgeye Nation, or if you're not part of Hedgeye Nation, thanks for watching Hedgeye on YouTube. If you haven't already, make sure to click on the button below there. Subscribe to our YouTube page. You can also follow the link in the description to our
website to get even more great investing content.
It's not surprising, but it's interesting to say it that way. And I want to do that tail end of the curve group first, but then try to bring it back to, like, what if you're just, somebody who wants to get there, and that can mean a lot of things in investing.
Yeah.
Again, we're a lot of different starting points.
Yeah.
Or people have to start all over again, which you see in the investing community now. Like, literally, if you did what you did pre-pandemic, or you did what you did, God forbid, 10, 20 years ago, it'd be the equivalent of playing hockey with a wooden stick.
Sure.
Like, you can do that. You might be really good at that, but you're really at a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah.
On the super high end, like McDermott, Spieth, Cohen, that's quite a crew if you had on a hockey line. But how do you see the emotional variance, like high, low, however you want to describe, tilt?
No, it's interesting. So it generally begins with the why. So it's funny, when I wrote my first book, it's called Fearless Golf. I wrote it for a very small number of people. I wrote it for an audience of about 500.
I love that book.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
That's
Yeah,
that's how I find most people. I just read books and I'm like, wow, this guy sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and
somebody pings me, they see it and they're like, look, one of our clients says, well, I know Gio.
Yeah. And I wrote it for really smart people. I mean, that's the thing in my life. I celebrate smart. And when I was at Point 72, I remember saying to the Academy kids, because really smart kids tend to, school doesn't treat them very well all the time, right? They tend to be isolated. So when you come into my world, I often say, hey, it's okay to be smart here. Like, you can show off a little bit. Like take the straitjacket off, the psychological straitjacket, and fly and be free. But I wrote that book for really, really smart people, and it ended up being published in 7 languages, which was nobody's plan. That was not a book that was supposed to travel the way that it did. But what happened was, it was the second chapter of that book. There's a chapter called Mastery and Ego, and that's the chapter that caught Jack Nicklaus's attention. And so in 2002, I think it was, Jack Nicklaus hadn't made a cut on the PGA Tour in 3 years. Like, he hadn't made a cut. And he had I'd used him as an example of mastery versus ego, like why people do what they do. And this is a long-winded way of getting to the answer to your question. And he read it, and he invited me to join him at his tournament, the Memorial up in Ohio. And so I flew up with Jack and his family. It was sort of surreal for me. And he had asked me, he said, hey, how do you know all these things about me? Because I'd written a psychological profile about him, and I was scared because I'd never asked permission. And I said, well, Jack, I look at all the things you've said and how you play the game, and I just reverse engineered it, and I assume that, if this happened, then the motivation, the reason why you play the game has to be this. And he said, nobody's ever known that about me.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really remarkable. And he gave me the greatest compliment he's ever given, I've ever received. He goes, he said this to the media. He said, this guy's the only sports psychologist I ever met who's worth a damn. Like that's high praise, right? That's as much as you're getting from Jack.
Yeah. That'll travel.
Yeah, that I'm worth a damn. Yeah, he's worth a damn. But what happens is, when you start with the why, Einstein did not win the Nobel Prize because his goal is to win a Nobel Prize. He fell in love with physics, right? And so there's this process that happens where it's not quite following your passion, but it's something. It's this, right? Why do you do this, Keith? I know a little bit about your history, and you could be sort of doing what you'd always done and running the play, but it probably got stale to you. And so what I see here is an act of creative expression. This is a vision. This is what William James said, the great American psychologist and philosopher. He said, a man's vision is the most singular feature about him. Man, woman, people, right? Forgive the jargon of the time. But like, what happens is, in the evolution of greatness is your work, your craft is an expression of your purest form of freedom and psychological freedom. And I think that's what you've done here. It's certainly what Steve's done everywhere he goes. It's what he's done with Point 72. It's what he's done with his art collection. And it's what he's doing with the Mets. And so when people want to get to the tail end of the curve, it has to start with the why, because if it's an inauthentic why, invariably it collapses. Because the other thing that happens is, in that article, The Mundanity of Excellence, he talks about this inversion where people fall in love with the really, really hard things, right? So for example, swimmers. Swimmers don't want to practice flip turns, but the best ones fall in love with practicing flip turns. And when I see the best investors that I've worked with, I'll give an example. Steve Cohen, over the course of 40 years, I asked his wife, Alex, I said, I got to ask you, Alex. I said, how many days off has Steve taken in the time that you've been with him? And she didn't even hesitate. She said 4. I said 4. She said, yeah, he was in the hospital. He got hospitalized for whatever, 20 years in the hospital, and he couldn't trade. And as soon as he woke up, he said, hey, get the screens in here. Like, I need to see what's going on. But it's not that he's a workaholic. You know, and Kobe talks about this. There's this merging of vocation and avocation that happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your work and your hobby, your passion, they become one and the same. And so what you hear often out of popular psychology is, you know, you are not what you do. Like, your work is what you do, and you are who you are. But don't tell that to the best in the world, because for the best in the world, there's a merging that happens. That what I've created is an expression of who I am. So there's this blending, this merging. Mm-hmm. It's Tiger Woods, right? It's Kobe, obviously. It's Michael Jordan. It's Steve Cohen. It's not Rory McIlroy in the golf world, interestingly enough. Rory's a once in a 100-year talent. But what you see is the hesitation out of Rory, and he's getting better at it, is he hasn't fully committed himself. He's not all in. And I know he would be mad if he heard me say that, because he thinks he's all in. But there's a level of risk and a level of turning yourself over to what you're doing that's required to really live at the tail end of the curve.
This is the macro show. This is pregame, okay? We're trying to play the game that's in front of us today, trying to give you all the content so that you can see that there are many tools in the toolbox to play at the highest level. You know, leadership matters at Hedgeye, so again, being transparent, accountable, and trustworthy people. This is a game about playing and weighing probability. It's not about picking stocks. It's about picking the right portfolio. Execute across everything. Don't get distracted by the MSM and the tourists. They're very dangerous. I will grind and execute for you with our people and with you.
All in being, it's okay to be fully and wholly who you are out loud. Is that what you mean by that?
And be fearless about it.
I think I've personally gone overboard on that, but you know, people. I mean, and when you do that, and I don't care. But when you are that, like when you're just comfortable, just saying whatever.
Yeah.
You know, I think just the basic use of having a potty mouth on a Hedgeye TV, people are like, oh my God, I can't. It's like, well, I'm a hockey player. Like, that's how we talk.
Yeah.
You know, I worked on Wall Street. That's how we talk. It's okay. You know, so for me, that was actually a huge thing. Hedgeye in the beginning, even if you look at it, how I was dressing, how I was talking, I was limiting myself. Like, I wasn't going for it.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, some days I'm told I go too far. Like I said, I don't give a shit. But I mean, it's like it's that I've committed to that.
Yeah, yeah, and therein lies, you know, when things evolve to the level of, you know, art, right? You know, artists, right. Or the creative expression. But there's also something really interesting in what you just said. So in psychology, we talk about what's called the synthetic function of language. The synthetic function of language, and the idea being that when you're forced to articulate something, you take all this mumbo-jumbo stream of it's in everyone's mind, and when you start articulating it, it puts structure. So language structures thought, right? Yep. So the ability to articulate. And so words matter. And so some of the best therapists of all time, by the way, they're not noted for the answers they give. Great therapy isn't me telling you what to do. Great therapy is sometimes me being an active listener, and then all of a sudden you start articulating, you know, what you're trying to convey. And then people will leave a session like, man, that was great. And I didn't say anything. Or the therapist hasn't said anything. So the synthetic function of language, the articulation. And therein lies, by the way, the real frightening phenomenon of the limitation of free speech. By limiting free speech, you're limiting the most important quality in the human condition, which is the diversity of ideas. And so people need to have, we talk about safe space. Safe space is not saying things that are inoffensive. A safe space is a place where you feel free to articulate anything you want. I mean, Eminem and Dr. Dre, I was listening to an interview. I try to study anyone who's at the tail end of the curve, whether it's Avicii, Eminem, people in science, people in physics, and like he talks about the freedom of expression, the creative expression. So language matters, and the fact, and one other thing I'll say about that, the reason that people at the tail end of the curve, like I always say that Steve Cohen and Tiger Woods have more in common than Tiger Woods and Sergio Garcia, for example. Tiger Woods and Sergio Garcia, all they share is golf. What Tiger and Steve care is psychological freedom. It's what you're describing. It's all in. It's to be your fully authentic self, and to commit yourself to your craft, right? And that freedom to be who you are is something that's why excellence is an act of courage, because you have to protect that at all costs. Mm-hmm. That's why I have so much admiration for anyone who succeeds, because I know to get there, you had Doc Rivers always says, to get something, you have to go through something. And a lot of it is the fear of being judged by other people.
Well, let's take that. I mean, I've been in the room. Obviously, I've been in a lot of rooms. Let's talk about the investing floor. Like you walk into, it can be 0.72. It could be where I was, Magnetar, pick a hedge fund, really.
Yeah.
Open floor, a lot of these places, some aren't. But that's what I grew up in, the open architecture. It's endemic to the room that everyone else in the room isn't exactly on your team. So that's an interesting dynamic. So it's not like team sports,
Yeah.
or at least a good team.
Yeah.
Because everyone's not playing for each other because you're competing for capital.
Right.
Behavior externally, actually somewhat matters until you make it. I've never seen Steve Cohen really care. He's not my BFF or anything, but it's not like he walks around caring about what people think. But everybody that works for him has to kind of think about that.
Sure.
How do you think about the time and space required to get there versus to get to who you fully are versus the environment that you're in?
Yeah. So the human brain is interesting for many reasons, but one of the things is it tends to like to think in binary terms, right? And so for example, it's called an antinomy. Antinomy is an apparent contradiction, but that's not a real contradiction. So we talk about cooperation versus competition. Like, should I be competitive or should I be cooperative? Well, you should be both. And it speaks to the highest state of mind is when you galvanize these seeming antinomies. So, for example, I think it was Buddha, but like Buddha gets credited with a lot of things, so maybe it wasn't the Buddha.
Definitely wasn't.
Yeah. But who said, do every act as if the fate of the universe depended on the outcome, while laughing at yourself for thinking that anything you do really matters at all. And it's like E.E. Cummings. E.E. Cummings says, teach me to care and not to care. I want you to think about this line out of E.E. Cummings' poem. He says, I want you to care so much about what you're doing. But the key word there is and. Teach me to care and not to care. And this happens on the PGA Tour all the time. Or it happens with fighter pilots in the military. So you have to care so much about what you're doing in the military. You're giving up your civilian status. You're putting your life at risk. You're dedicating countless hours. You're being away from your family. You care about your craft. If you care too much, you can't fly with freedom. You can't fly that jet, that F-16, that F-22. And so you're trying to find this, same with golf, right? And so psychological freedom, a lot of the success that I've had with golfers is really trying to get to a place where it's psychologically free. So you care so much about your game that you're investing thousands of hours, practicing every day, traveling, sunburn, which is, it's an incredibly difficult sport. But if you're holding on too tight, when you're standing over a 4-foot putt or a 5-foot putt, you can't play the game at that level. So you're trying to care and not care in the same moment. So we talk about these contradictions, but they're apparent contradictions. In the NFL, it's as competitive as the hedge fund world, but you're trying to find that sweet spot where you're playing. Urban Meyer, who's going to go down as one of the greatest football coaches in the history of college football, wins everywhere he goes. What he always coaches people to do, and I worked with the Gators during the Tim Tebow years, and I watched it. I had a front row seat to it a little bit. And what he says is, take care of yourself and take care of your teammates. It's a simple phrase, but it's very literal. Take care of yourself first. Make sure you're buttoned up. And then once you've done your job, look for someone to help. So if you're an offensive lineman, you knocked your guy down, then go try to find someone else to help. But take care of yourself and take care of your teammates. And so I think in a great organization, you can have both. You can be competitive and cooperative. You can care about, Ayn Rand talks about, she writes about individualism and the highest order of man as being, in the wealth of nations, that the free market rewards everyone acting in their own self-interest. But John Nash came along and said, that's not exactly true. It's what Urban Meyer says. It's act in your own self-interest, right? Because that's what creates innovation, but also take care of other people. And that's why the innovation of Nashian economics, I think, is an extension of free market thinking, because you can do both. There's a way to be both, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you care about yourself and your family, and you care about your employees at an authentic level. And I know that because I can see that they feel it. And I'm sure that there are moments where you put people aside and you're coaching them as a human being. It's an apparent contradiction that's not a real contradiction.
There's a great book, it's an older book, called It's Your Ship. I don't know if you read it. It was written by his Captain Abrashoff, I think is how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
But he created the best damn ship in the Navy. And almost 100% of what you just said is the point of that book. It's like a timeless book on leadership. Because you're quite literally, we're all in the boat together in that case. And he had to create an environment where we're really doing our job, as Belichick would say, but at the same time caring about our shipmates. And it's for me that's the intuitive way to play. It's the way I have to play, because I'm not the most talented player on the team. But if I play with really talented players and I work my ass off, then I can be a contributor on the team, and I can. It makes more sense for me to play it that way.
Yeah. Some
people in the game, they're one-man bands, single shooters. Infrequently have I seen that work in the investing world. Competitors first.
Yeah.
But collaborators, they're the best. And it's kind of interesting in this day and age, because a lot of people think that they can kind of sit behind their keyboard and just do this from home on their own. I mean, I think that that's crazy.
Well, and I think what you have to respect about that is there's this really remarkable human being alive today. His name is Daniel Tammet. And Daniel Tammet is the world's foremost polymath right now. He's got a condition known as synesthesia. It's what Rain Man had, right? So the idea of Rain Man.
So you're like definitely.
Yeah, this guy's super talented.
What's his
on the curve.
Tammet?
I think it's Tammet, Daniel Tammet. He wrote a book called Born on a Blue Day. And so what's remarkable about this young man is, so he can multiply pi times itself, I think for like 15 hours straight, 22,000. Just sit there and just multiply. If you tell him your birth date, he'll tell you the day you were born, just like that, right? But what's interesting is, if you ask me to write pi, and whoever's watching this should go look it up, Daniel Tammet pi. Mm-hmm. If you ask me to write pi, I'll write the number the way 99.9% of people write it. Daniel Tammet will draw a picture. To him, numbers have dimension, texture, color, and emotion. So 7 is stern, 8 is jovial, 1 is lonely. And he's got this really unique way of conceptualizing numbers. But that's why, for example, Einstein, was considered a dunce when he was younger, because he has such a unique and differentiated perspective, right? And so think of this, for example, and if anyone who, I know you're a voracious consumer of books, anyone who cares about excellence should go read the collected works of Vincent van Gogh. It's a collection about this thick, and it's letters to his brother Theo, and he really is articulate as he's going through life. He journaled really thoughtfully, and brilliant. I mean, he's Van Gogh for a reason. But what's remarkable is, now's the time of year where I start stargazing with my kids. And the other night we saw Jupiter over the moon, and you see Saturn, the sky is starting to become clear. And when I look up at the night sky, I see the Big Dipper. And Van Gogh saw Starry Night. And it's like, it's the looked at thing versus how we experience the looked at thing. Yeah. And so I say all that because when people look at the market just is, right? A golf course just is. But if you ask Tiger Woods, when you look down the fairway, what do you see? Tiger sees shapes and trajectories and things that nobody else in the game has ever seen. Mm-hmm. And he's got the work ethic and the ability to hit the shots that he sees. So it's like, right now, for example, what's happening is there's a psychological shift in a lot of market participants where they see the market as a place of threat rather than a place of abundance. So the market just is. But what you see will be determined by what you look for, largely. Not always, but largely. And so, for example, if we go to a social event tonight, not that I'm a very social person, but if we go to a party and we're going into the party and you say to me, hey, you know what? And it's called priming in psychology. The people here are going to be, they're really stuffy and sort of self-absorbed and not very kind. Well, now I'm preset to look for people who are stuffy and and I will actually find what I'm primed to look for. And this happens all the time in the world, but it's happening in the markets. People have been talking about a recession and sort of a shift in late cycle. And all of a sudden, rather than seeing the market as a place of abundance, you see it as a place of threat. The market's always a place of threat, and it's always a place of abundance.
Right.
And this is what entrepreneurial, sort of smart-minded, malleable people do, is entrepreneurs pivot. The market shifts, and they shift with it. And that's one of Steve's great, colloquial insights. He's like, hey, I didn't invent the world. I have to live in it like everybody else. And my job is to pivot and evolve with the world. And so he's this malleable human being. I think I'm okay saying this. I think his wife sometimes would jokingly refer to Steve as tofu. Tofu takes on the flavor of whatever you put on it. And so it's this beautiful agnosticism that, hey, I'll buy and sell the same stock in a given day. With new information, my opinion will change.
Right.
he's not dug in on anything, and he's just this voracious learner. And I think that's the beauty of Steve Cohen, but it's the beauty of Tiger. You watch what Tiger Woods did. He reinvented himself 5 times. And this is what great people do, is they continue, Picasso, right?
Yeah.
Different periods, this constant state of reinvention. And so I think when you talk about does individualism work, it works for people who see the game that way.
Yeah.
Now, where you get lost there is what we call the social construction of knowledge. You know, psychology shows that idea generation does not happen here. Not for me and not for you and not for anybody in this room. Where it generally happens is through a social exchange. It happens between us, which is why dialogue and collaboration and teamwork really do work. You need someone to sort of bounce ideas off of. Crick and Watson, who discovered the structure of DNA. As the story goes, individually, really average scientists, but together they were geniuses, right? Together, it was in the social exchange. And when you find people who elevate you or who you elevate, and you have that beautiful social exchange, that's where the magic happens. So, yeah.
That's that's awesome. I think it was Picasso who said, "It's not what you look at; it's what you see." And that is, like, I'm critical of that. You know, externally, some people think I'm just marketing or branding. Well, yes, I am. I think this is a better way, by a long shot.
Yeah.
But until and we get this feedback all the time. I can become part of Hedgeye Nation. I can start to learn the process. It'll take me 6, 12 months to unpack or take out the baggage I used to have, relearn, adapt, evolve. Then I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like, no shit. I've been doing this for 23 years, and every day I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
I mean, but one of my big criticisms of the industry, if you're just looking at a simple moving average, I call it a moving monkey. So I'll give them names, things that I used to do. Again, if you're just looking at something, and I do appreciate how you said this polymath sees colors and shapes and has certain names or associations.
Yeah.
It's exactly what that's fractal math.
Yeah.
Like it quite literally defines the contour of an ocean line, the edge of a leaf. I mean, you don't have to have every rote equation in your head to be able to conceptualize, internalize, and then execute on a process using the principles of fractal math, which are far greater than linear economics, one-factor modeling. That's what a simple moving monkey is. It's a one-factor model. Well, let's use 3. Let's include the volatility of the market and the relationship to volume. So those kinds of things, like, again, I'm trying to get you to coach me to coach them. Like, it is hard, extremely hard for me, to take what I'm trying to do at the highest level, which is make money, trade my book, have people copy it or whatever, find ways to do that, and then come back and not be critical of my former self, which includes all those things. That's hard.
Yeah. I used to say it in golf, and now I find myself saying it more and more in the hedge fund world. So a golfer said to me once, I won't say his name, but he said, golf does to the brain what boxing does to the body. You're an emotional punching bag. I've seen more grown men cry in the game of golf at the tail end of the curve.
One-on-one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
People don't understand, Keith, how hard that fucking game is. It's unbelievable like what those guys and girls go through to play at that level, how hard that game is. And your guys' game is very equivalent. It's pretty equivalent. And but what happens is, so the pain of failure is not equivalent to how good success feels. And failure hurts more than success feels good.
100%.
And this is at a chemical level. So what happens is, when we make mistakes, the brain uses adrenaline and it highlights that memory. And essentially, it's through natural selection. It's if you made a mistake and you got hurt, as we were evolving, your brain said, "Hey, you better remember this so you don't put yourself in danger again." And so what happens? That's why over the course of time, investors tend to become more risk averse, because what happens is we engage in some version of self-abuse. So what's interesting is, is really exceptional people are more accountable in elementary school and middle school and high school and college. And when they make mistakes, they obsess over those mistakes. But then what you end up at the highest end is a sample of people, all of who did that, right? All of who were harder on themselves, more demanding, and worked harder. Well, with that distribution, now what wins? And this is one of the things, I tell you, it was the hardest thing that I had to sell out on the PGA Tour. No one really wanted to listen to me in my first few years when I would say, if you make a mistake in golf, you have to accept that mistake and let it go. And competitive people don't like to accept mistakes and let it go and move on. And so some would say to me, so you want me to suck and enjoy it? No, thank you. And so here I am out there trying to pitch my wares, and nobody was really interested. But at a certain point, you couldn't ignore my guys because they were winning everything. At a certain point, my guys won, I think, 22% of all the events on the PGA Tour, at which point you had to pay attention to the playbook I was running. And that playbook was predicated on, I want you all in, fully committed. And right after your shot, what I want you to say to yourself is, I accept the outcome of that shot. And let it go, and psychological detachment.
Let's start over again.
Yeah, start over.
Yep.
And here's why. We talk about the importance of psychological freedom. And this is true if you want to be good at anything, right? You can't be attached to other people's opinions of you. You can't be attached to the past. You can't be attached to fear of the future. Well, how do you let go of these attachments? So for example, if you don't mind, let me see your hand. Right now, you and I are attached, right? This is an attachment. What have we both lost in this moment? What don't you have anymore?
I'm not by myself anymore.
You have no freedom.
Right.
I've taken your freedom, right?
Yeah.
So as I go, you're going with me. So we've both lost freedom because we're attached. And so what happens is when we let go, freedom. Psychologically, there's not a physical attachment, but people attach to the past, right? It's you're obsessed over the mistake you made. You're obsessed over the things you didn't do. Why did I hit the 8-iron instead of the 7-iron? Why did I say this to my wife instead of that? Why did I say this to so people spend a lot of their lives attached to the past. If you're attached to, if you made a bad trade, a bad decision, you miscoached one of your analysts or so forth, you're attached to the past, that means you're not present. And if you're not present, you're not psychologically free. People also attach to the future. They ask a lot of what-if questions. Oh, what if I don't make any money this year? What if so-and-so doesn't approve of me? What if management cuts my capital? And all of a sudden, now you're attached to the future. And so what you see is people are walking around attached to the past, attached to the future, and attached to people's perceptions of them, which is the most dangerous. So all of a sudden now, instead of, one of the things I always say to portfolio managers is perfect thinking is this. You're deploying capital proportional to the opportunity in the moment. Deploy capital proportional exactly to the opportunity in this moment. And that's the litmus test of whether or not you're making good decisions. And you would think, well, that's obvious. But it's not obvious. Because the equivalent of that was golfers, and that was sort of the central feature of Fearless Golf was, it's a simple question, what's my target? And I remember my advisor, who was this unbelievable human being, to this day, maybe the greatest man I've ever known, a guy named Frank Baharis. When I told him what I was learning out on the PGA Tour, he said, Gio, you're telling me golfers don't know they should pick a target on every shot? I said, it's not that they don't know, but there's so much information, it's cognitive overload, that they don't do the simple thing well. And that's a Buddhist principle of doing a simple thing well. So on the PGA Tour, you should always ask a simple question. What's my target? Everything else, revolves around that. For investors, it's deploy capital proportional to the opportunity. But that's not what investors do. They deploy capital because they had a good year last year, so they built a $10 million house, and now they're in a job. But they need to make money this year, so now they're deploying capital to solve their own personal problems. They deploy capital because they're trying to show off to the risk management, or they're trying to, or they deploy capital because everyone in their sector is up and they're down. Or there's so many reasons that bias decision making. And when you hold the standard of are you deploying capital proportional to the opportunity in the moment, all of a sudden it's very clarifying for people, right?
Yeah. That's why I like having preset rules. Actually, one of the best, he's a subscriber, he's a hedge fund manager actually, teaching me golf. And I've had a lot of people in this business that are pretty good amateur golfers that always can resonate with me in terms of, okay, Keith, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
You need to know right down to the 3-yard range what each of your clubs hits.
Yeah.
That's got to be preset. All this has to be preloaded. Just like your min, your max size positioning, how you incrementally touch each position. That's already, that when we're in the game and we're trying to trade the market, that's already set. That's done.
Yeah.
You take that away. You don't start trading things, and I used to see it actually in the old days. People just trade in round share lots. buy 100,000 shares of this. And stock could be 10 or could be 100, and they'd still buy. It's like, really?
Yeah.
Like we're just doing it.
Right.
It's
right.
not,
Just sloppiness. Yeah.
Right. So there's the deliberate execution. The more that you can not think about.
Yeah.
But still, okay, that's the target. That's my club. I got it.
Yeah.
Everything else, how many drinks you had last night or whatever happened, that's just can't enter. It's an interesting thing. My question before we take other people's questions, unfortunately, we'll have 15 minutes for that, is do you think, it's unlike sports where I always say this to my kids, where like my son always says, well, why didn't you make it to the NHL? And because all I do is coach hockey, and he loves hockey, and he's trying to figure out why he may not make it to the NHL, I think. But I say, Jack, God only gave me 5'9". There's only X that I am was physically capable in an era where Marty St. Louis wasn't even drafted because he was shorter. That's it. In this profession, there's no size. There's no natural God-given talent in terms of your physical, who you are as a person, the body you were born into, or the one that you got to work through.
Yeah.
This business, is there a preset? In fractal math, we'd say similar sets of characteristics that gives somebody an innate advantage, almost an endemic advantage, no matter what the person tries to coach themselves to do.
Really good question. And where I've arrived on that, and I'm open to being wrong on this, but where I've arrived, and this is the way I look at it, it's what I've seen. And this is what's really true in both golf and with PMs and hedge fund participants. There's 5 ways to win, just 5. And what you're referring to is the first way. It's you're super talented. You're just massive IQ points, right? And in golf, it's Rory McIlroy. Like, he's got the same golf swing he had when he was 6 years old. Like, it's just talent, right? But if you want to win in a game where you're not as talented, you don't have the horsepower, right? What can you do? Well, you can outwork someone.
Yep.
Right? So if someone's smarter than me, I'm not going to close that gap because IQ is pretty fixed. On the PGA Tour, talent is fixed. Okay, well, I'm going to outwork you. Okay. Well, once I've hit the point where I've worked as hard as I can, or let's say you want to be a good father and a good husband, so you've got to limit how hard you can work. Well, there's a third way. Third way is have a great process, right? Be religious about process. Process and routine can overcome talent, and so all of a sudden you become more efficient with your time if you're diligent about having a really good process. Okay, there's a fourth way. Let's say that you're smart. Everyone in this business is smart, and you work pretty hard, and you have a pretty good process. But like, okay, what's the next thing you can do? Well, I'm good at those things, but I'm not great. But I'm a great developer and manager of talent. So I'm going to hire great people and just manage. So you can manage and hire a team of people to compensate for your weaknesses. What you realize on the PGA Tour, outside of Tiger Woods, everyone's just a collection of compensations. Everything's there's no perfect. Like, golf is not a game of perfect. Neither is investing. And so you're either super, super smart, or you're going to work really, really hard, or you're going to be religious about process, or you're going to hire really, really, really well. And I forget, there's a fifth one that's not coming to my mind. I call these my 5 postulates. But like, that's it. And so when I'm working with somebody, I want to know, what's your advantage? Like, how are you different? What do you do so well? Mm-hmm. And then you better know what you do well, because you got to know the game you're playing, because you're not going to outthink. I won't think a couple people I have in mind, but like, these people are just prodigiously good minds, like Daniel Tammet. Okay, but you're working harder, or you're more organized and structured.
On these, I think about this a lot. Talent, what's endemic also to Wall Street is that you have academic talent, and then you have street smart talent. Mm-hmm. So to me, that means anybody in the world can do this.
Yeah.
I've seen people, that are quite literally on paper the smartest person that ever went to Yale or Harvard or whatever you qualify as.
But they can't make money.
Awful.
Yeah.
Because they're really bad at defining what is work ethic. Let's just start with that.
Yeah.
Like, my definition of work ethic is very different than other people's, and that pisses people off.
Yeah.
Oh, you work hard. You work hard. Like, you have no fucking idea what working hard is,
right,
and doing it efficiently.
Yeah.
The process piece.
Yeah.
To me, in this business, those are the two. Because everyone, I'll grant you, you're either street smart or on paper or both, you're smart. Mm-hmm. But that's where you can really screw up your process. Like between 4:35 a.m. and 6 a.m., I have to be out, done, 800-word essay, all data accumulated from the night before. It's all about the preparation of that.
Yeah.
And creating some kind, like just being free of mind, creating an early look. So this is what I'm thinking today. I always use a book to trigger me so that I have something that I can at least, tangentially tie to a normal human being.
Yeah.
Like today, it's Flight 173, United Flight 173, where people died in 1978 because the pilot thought it was the landing gear and he was running out of fuel, and they crashed with the landing gear on.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's that. I see people overthink it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you have your day compartmentalized where you need to be super efficient, and you're outworking everybody, you can get knocked off that rail of process. Somebody called, like my wife says, hey, something's going on. We have a relationship where no bueno. This plane needs to land. I'm not going to help with our child. That may sound bad to people.
Yeah. No.
But if I do that, the rest of the day, like she can do that.
Yeah.
Right?
No, 100%.
So, she may not appreciate what I just said, but I think she does because we've already argued about it.
Yeah.
Because it's not normal to not be there. But my job working from home during the pandemic meant that I am outside of the ecosystem that I need to be in during game day.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I'm out.
That's right. Well, and it speaks to what does it mean to care and love your family. Like, yeah, I love my family, but on an everyday basis, the way that I show my love for my family is I'm out there trying to create a life for them and send someone to college and put
100%.
food on the table. So, like, love means different things, or is expressed in somewhat different ways. So, yeah, I agree fully.
So I guess that's, and then I'll take other people's questions. What's back to, like I said, what is the variance in terms of emotional variance between, which we talked about already, between people playing at a high level, whatever the level may be, but what do you see in the investing community in terms of the variance on process to work ethic?
Again, I see, and there's a really great graphic out there, and go look it up on Google. Look at the best golfers in the last 50 years, their golf swing in the three key positions. At the top, the top of the golf swing here and at impact. And what you see is they're all snowflakes. They're all different. Dustin Johnson is here, and Tiger is here, and Freddie Couples. And this speaks. I'll tell you a really interesting thing. This is the most fascinating thing and most enjoyable thing about what I do, is once you have a template for what great looks like, but you realize that everyone's different. Well, how do you square that circle? It's like no one's the same, but there are things you have to look for, right? And here's what Jordan Spieth said to me. It was the most fascinating moment. If you look at Jordan Spieth technically, his golf swing, no one's going to teach that. No one's teaching Jordan Spieth's golf swing. But he's one of the best golfers the last 30 years. And when I asked him, I said, how do you do what you do? And he gave me a beautiful answer. He said, I have a knack for getting the ball in the hole quickly. It's just a knack. Similarly, when I asked Steve Cohen and I were playing golf one day, and we were playing with a guy who's on paper genius, like polymath. And I said, hey, do you think he's smarter than you? Steve said, absolutely. I said, why do you say that? He said, he's got more horsepower. But what Steve doesn't realize, Steve has what's called inferential intelligence. Steve doesn't make bad decisions. He may not have perfect memory. He may not have, but he makes great decisions. And that inferential intelligence is the equivalent of what Jordan Spieth has. I get the ball in the hole quickly. Money makers have a knack for making money. Conversely, you have people, I remember I had a golfer, a PGA Tour golfer, say to me once, his coach came to me and said, here's his numbers on TrackMan. He's got a perfect putting stroke. I said, yeah, a perfect putting stroke that does everything but make putts. He's 142nd on the PGA Tour in putting. So it can't be a perfect putting stroke if it doesn't make putts.
It's like
technical excellence versus that knack for getting it done.
In hockey, I call it cone players, because they do privates, particularly around here.
Yeah.
We live in proximity to all the money, obviously, right? So kids do privates. We're talking about kids, 15U hockey players. They're all, some of them might make it to the NHL. But what they do with their privates coach and how that is implemented into their game and translated to hockey IQ sometimes has a very negative value.
Yeah.
It looks really sweet. It's really cool, but it's absolutely the wrong decision in that particular moment of game time that you need to make it.
Yeah, no, you see it in sports all the time. One of my former clients, Mike Modano, who's a really good hockey player. And so, do you know Mike?
Yeah, did you know that he's the second leading all-time scorer in NHL history as a born American?
I did know that, and the reason I know that...
Whenever I ask people that, they always guess wrong.
Well, here's why I know that, because when he called me, I answered the phone, and I said, hello. He He said, Dr. Gio. I said, yeah. He goes, Mike Modano. I said, hey, Mike. And I'm like, it's Mike Modano. Like, because I didn't know.
You had to Google him?
He was talking to me because we had mutual friends. I'm like, oh, hey, Mike. I'm like, oh, this guy. And a funny story, I ended up introducing him to his wife, Allison Modano, and I gave the speech at their wedding. But like when you ask Mike how he did what he did, it's distilled to what a lot of the great ones say. It's what David Duval said at his speak. It's like, I don't know, I see a fade and I hit it. And for Mike, it was just speed. He was just so fast. But the game was slow. And Gretzky said the same thing. It's like, at my best, everything happened in slow motion. Michael Jordan said the same thing. So yeah.
In markets, in particular, when volatility picks up, the game should slow down for you.
Yeah.
If you're not playing at the highest level, the game picks up emotionally. We want to play against you.
Yeah.
Like that's the point. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask some of their questions.
Sure.
But Mike Modano, he's a beauty. By the way, for those of you that don't know who's #1 all time, his dad was a Canadian, Brett Hull. Dr. Gio, what is the #1 mental mistake you've seen commonly when preparing to succeed?
So if you look at all sort of major religious traditions, they all share one thing, and it's this idea of desire, right? If you think about human beings, and Abraham Maslow talked about human beings as being insatiable, like this ever-wanting creature, right? So think of it, you go to dinner, and you're like, oh, I'm stuffed, I can't eat another bite. And then 15 minutes later, you're like, oh, where's the dessert tray, right? You think about sort of the biological mandate of sex. It's like, sexual satiation, and then all of a sudden it's just a recurring desire and want. And so what happens is in religious traditions have tried to solve for this. So what does Catholicism do? Well, the Catholics say, well, desire's bad, it leads to so punish it with guilt, right? Desire's a bad thing, so make people feel guilty. And the Buddhists and the Hindus say, no. Desire leads to suffering, therefore remove it. The key to happiness is to want nothing, right? And then what do the hedonists say? The hedonists say, no. If you want it, satiate that desire, right? Here's the problem. All three lead to some, Catholicism leads to psychopathology because of the guilt.
You're talking to an Irish Catholic.
Yeah, so you get it. Buddhism, just because the lack of desire doesn't mean you're happy and fulfilled. And hedonism leads to coke problem, and you're going to drive your car in a DUI. It's like so anyway, the fundamental a priori feature of the human condition is that we all have desire. This is the Genesis, the Garden of Eden, the apple. I want that, and temptation leads to you can have eternal glory or you live with original sin, right? It's desire. Anyway, so what happens is people impose their desires on the market. This happens all the time.
Yep.
So the goal is to see the market as it is, to see yourself as you are, and to see your relationship with the market as it is. That's accurate thinking. But we start imposing our desires on the market. It's like, I want to make money today.
Today, yeah.
What if there's no opportunity today? Now you start imposing your needs on the market. And the one thing that the market is, it's what I call an expositive tool. It exposes whoever you... So if you're overconfident, it gets exposed. If you're underconfident, it gets exposed. If you're risk averse, it gets exposed. If you're reckless, it gets exposed. If you're stupid and you keep making the same mistake again, you're going to be exposed. And so the two biggest problems, #1 is you impose your needs on the market, and #2, you don't know yourself. And in the absence of knowing yourself and your own biases and predilections, and you can't do this game because you're going to be exposed, and it's going to be expensive. You'll get punished.
Big
right?
time. I mean,
so,
I always say, you trade the market you have, not the one you need.
That's right.
I mean, that's one. And again, I always say, in any sport, do you know any sport where Mike Modano is going to tell you that in the second minute of the second period, I need to score? That's not the way the game goes. I mean, I know it simplifies some of the complex. We only have time for one more question. It's a good one, though. From Alex. Dr. Gio, how do you help someone who went all in but crashed psychologically? I'll just actually ask it that way.
It depends on the form of the crash, and it depends what you mean by all in, right? So if you went all in on something, and you didn't make it, and this is real. That's the thing that people don't realize. The glory stories, we always talk about the success stories, but there's recent literature that talks about a lot of successes knowing when to quit. Like we always talk about perseverance and persistence as winning, but sometimes like you need to know when to get out of a bad situation. If you stayed building wheels for horse and buggies when Henry Ford was building the assembly line, like it didn't end well for you. So you need to know when and how to pivot. But it depends on what form the crash and collapse looks like and what you do with the failure. So one of the things that I've learned, and this is very literal, is that built into every failure is the exact lesson that you need to learn to get better. But it's not always obvious. Right? I had a golfer one time tell me, he called me, wanted to work with me, and I said, yeah, come spend a day with me, and maybe I can work with you. But he didn't want to do the work to come spend the day with me. So finally, after like the 5th time he called me, I said, yeah, come spend. He goes, can you just tell me why I'm hitting my wedges not close to the hole? I said, that's exactly the problem with you. You're asking the wrong question.
Right.
I said, so don't call me anymore. I said, if you want help, come see me, but don't call me because I'm done with this conversation because you're not willing to learn. He came and spent the day with me, and 3 weeks later he won a PGA Tour event. But the idea being, the mistake he was making was so deeply rooted in who he was as a person. And so I think if you failed, you have to ask why you failed, but it's not the veneers of failure. It's not superficial. It's not what does the data tell me.
No, exactly.
It's what about you got exposed as a human being. Where's your blind spot? Because we all have blind spots, right? And then who do you have in your life that's helping you identify that blind spot? Because the brain is not designed for you, me, or anyone to be an accurate observer of ourselves. You don't see yourself accurately. Your wife sees you accurately. People around see me more accurately than I see myself. And so if you failed, you have to actually do the hard work of asking people, like, what do you see out of me that you think led to that? People who are willing to be truthful with you and honest, that care about you. That's probably the place you want to begin.
That's awesome. And my brain is like going all over the place throughout this entire conversation. This is what, when we started Real Conversations, this was the vision. Just to be able to have a conversation, let everyone watch. Like what you just explained, there's a book by Ed Viesturs. It's called No Shortcuts to the Top.
Yeah.
And he climbed, all the 8,000ers, and his whole point was when not to summit.
Yeah.
And that's how you don't crash and die.
Yeah.
And that's, you made me think of that. But I'm sure you made people in their own way, because we're all different, think about a lot of things about themselves. And like you said at the beginning, that's actually one of the most important things with you guys. So thank you so much for coming in here and having this conversation. I hope we have I'd have conversations with you all the time if I could.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Keith, I'm a huge fan. Everyone who I know in the hedge fund world speaks highly of you, and that's a real testament because people in this world don't hand out compliments easily, but you've played the game the right way, and that's really admirable. That you do it well and you do it the right way. That people say that. I love what you have here. I love that you're thoughtful. You're a voracious consumer of books. You're wonderful, a wonderful scholar in a smart community. So thanks for having me. Thanks for a really thoughtful dialogue, and I wish you all the success in the world.
Awesome. Thank you very much. He is Dr. Gio. How good is he? Read all of his books, get up to speed. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to have Nancy Davis next.
Hey there, Hedgeye Nation, or if you're not part of Hedgeye Nation, thanks for watching Hedgeye on YouTube. If you haven't already, make sure to click on the button below there, subscribe to our YouTube page. You can also follow the link in the description to our website to get even more great investing content.